Hello and welcome back to E3 Energy and Efficiency with Emily. This is episode 9, and today I want to talk to you about windows. So windows are one of my favorite soapbox subjects, and I like to talk about all of the different reasons why you have windows in your structure. First of all, we're not cavemen, so windows are really important. But there are 5 key factors to why people would have windows. I teach this in my sustainable design class, and so I'm going to give you my little slideshow so that I remember and I don't get off track and off on a tangent. So the first one is architectural appearance. That's going to be backwards for you, so sorry about that. Architectural appearance really has a major impact where windows are concerned. The size, the style, and the location of windows really sets aside the style of a structure. So if you have a traditional 6/9 double hung and they're evenly spaced across the front of the windows, across the front of the house, you could have a very traditional federal style building. Maybe you have a fixed window with large panes of glass and you might have a more mid-century modern style house. Maybe you have casement windows and they're grouped together and you're trying to create a really modern feel in a traditional structure. The size and location have a major impact on what the house looks like. You often hear me talk about trying to minimize the number of windows that you have on the north side of a house. We like to say that every house has an ugly side. That's maybe not necessarily true, but you do usually have some kind of utilities and things that are grouped together. And if you can keep them all on one side of a house so that you have 3 really beautiful sides of the house, you can have an ugly side. We try to make the north side the ugly side whenever possible, but that's not always possible. And sometimes you have a house where the front of the house is the north side. And unfortunately, you can't make that the ugly side. So you have to use the battle between how much glass can you have, which is a much lower performing part of your structure, and what does it architecturally look like? What's the appearance of that structure? And so you have to weigh the balance between the two. So architectural appearance with windows is a huge consideration for where you have your windows, where's the placement. My favorite is to look at a house where it looks like the scream. It has 2 windows above and 1 centrally located window, and all you can see is the painting, the scream on the house. Maybe that's an architect's perspective. I look at things visually on a house, but everybody has probably driven by some house where you look at it and you go, that just doesn't look quite right. And maybe you're not sure why it doesn't look quite right, or maybe you look at it and go, there are no windows on that side of the house, or there are no windows on this house, or why does it look this way? So architectural appearance for windows is kind of a huge thing. Daylight is the next thing. Everybody wants to have daylight inside their house. And daylight and solar radiation are not the same thing. So actually, north-facing windows have the best daylight because they always have some form of daylight, but they don't have any form of solar radiation through the windows, so you don't have overheating with the solar or other glare issues. But with daylighting, we also talk about with our clients is, where is the sun throughout the day, and how does that affect the interior spaces of your house? Do you rise early in the morning and your bedroom is on the east side and we have windows where you watch the sun rise, and then you're sitting out on your screen porch in the afternoon and watching the sunset on the west? And how does that move and track through the house throughout the whole day? And what kind of shading do you need to provide to make sure that you don't have an excess amount of glare? So say you're a work from home individual and your office is located on the southwest side, you're always going to have extra sunlight coming into the space. As you can see, my office is facing to the south right now, and even though it's raining, I have an extreme amount of light coming in from the side, and so that can have an effect on the glare on your screen. So there has to be a place in this room for me to place my computer so that the light coming in isn't affecting my computer screen. And so you have to take into account what that daylight means, what the glare is, what the surfaces on the inside of the house are, and how your windows affect that throughout your house, throughout your space, and what the use and occupancy of that space is. So daylighting is very important. Daylighting also has a second purpose, which is if you can provide enough light in the space, you don't have to use electrical lighting to offset poor lighting situations. And so wherever you can provide the proper amount of lighting in a space, instead, it's really fantastic to keep from turning on your lighting and be able to use your space just with the natural light from the windows. So again, daylighting is very important for window placement, where they are, how long they are, how much sun comes in through those windows, what the occupancy or use of each room is, and how that window is addressed based on that. So your windows can make a very big impact on that. Solar radiation is then another thing. So when I'm talking about how much sunlight is coming through the room, when we're talking about daylighting, I was just talking about illuminance. How much light is there in the room? I wasn't talking about the secondary factor, which is solar heat gain. So you're going to have the best light from the south for solar heat gain. So in a lot of passive solar houses, they want to try to plan to absorb as much of the solar heat gain as possible without overheating the space. So you can try to take up as much of that as possible without using your heating system. In a passive solar installation, you also need some kind of thermal mass to then absorb that heat, and then the heat gets radiated back out after the sun has gone down or is no longer shining on the surface. We don't do a lot of passive solar design simply because the super insulated structures actually overheat in a passive solar design. So there's a lot of factors and things that go into that. Also, not everybody is in love with having a 4-inch or 6-inch concrete floor that absorbs the heat. It's a very specific style. They used to do in the 70s trom walls, where they would have a wall that would stand in front of the windows, but most of us, again, like to see outside. So having this big thermal mass that was in front of the view, especially on the south side, from what we've found in our high performance homes, is the south has just this beautiful quality of light with some solar and daylighting that it's really fantastic to have that come in. Now, we do use it somewhat in our high performance houses, is that we definitely want to have more glazing on the south side, and we want to take advantage of some of that solar radiation that does heat the space during the day. So again, you're not using as much with your heating system, but you have to take into account that you must shade that in the summertime or you will have overheating. And we're not using a thermal mass to capture that. So we're only really able to take advantage of that solar heating while it's happening, and not so much after the fact to continue to heat the space, because we don't have a thermal mass in our space. Your west side windows are always going to have the most sun exposure, and so you definitely want to have those sides of your house shaded from summer sun, and in some cases winter sun as well. And if you don't have some kind of exterior shade to work with, you're going to definitely need some kind of interior shade that you need to manually operate to, help to reduce overheating from west-facing windows, which is possible in heating climates in the shoulder seasons, especially when you're getting too much west-facing sunlight into a space, even when it's cooler outside. Windows, I think, came into existence maybe for the next reason, most specifically, which is the view. So as I mentioned earlier, we're not cavemen. We like to see outside. We like to be outside. We like to feel like we're outside when we're inside. So we want to take advantage of the view. And with views, you want to make sure that you're not looking at your neighbor's dumpster, or that you're perfectly framing the pasture in the backyard with the windows. So we really take that into account, both minimizing the number of windows in certain locations, but also properly placing the windows within the house so that you take the maximum advantage of whatever is on the outside of the house with the view. And we spend a lot of time thinking about what you're actually going to see from that window when you're in the space. Are you looking into the woods behind your house? Are you looking at something else? And so since all of our houses are based on high performance and they're all oriented in a certain direction, we go out on the site, and when we're placing the house, we stand there and say, okay, this is going to be your view from your kitchen window. And we really carefully thought through what you're going to see and how you're going to be able to see it from the space, because looking outdoors and letting that light come in is just super important when you're talking about windows. And last but probably not least important is airflow. So in a high performance house, you could run your HRV or your ERV all year long. You would never have to open a window. Some people have really terrible seasonal allergies and choose not to open windows. But in this climate here in Maine, we find that most people really like the natural fresh air, and they like to pre-cool or I don't want to say preheat, that's not the right thing, but they like to pre-cool their houses, where they might even do nighttime cooling. So you open the windows at night when the humidity levels aren't going to be too high, and you're able to create a draft that pulls the heat out of the house, and it pre-cools all the surfaces in the house, so it stays cooler than during the day when the sun is up. That's a pretty common strategy in high performance houses, especially for people who do like to open their windows. But just for natural and fresh air, having windows located in a great cross ventilation area, so you're able to pull from high to low or across a certain structure or the wind direction, can be really important. And so airflow and fresh air ventilation is great, because windows are the operable, or can be the operable portion of your house, versus the static parts like walls and insulation. So airflow is kind of important as well. So that's the 5 key factors for windows in a structure. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about why we have windows, let's talk a little bit more about the performance of the windows themselves. So one of the simple things that most people think about with windows is that they need to be flashed and then they need to be installed. In a high performance world, we also talk about where they need to be located in the wall structure. So the most efficient place to have them is in the center of your insulation, which isn't always the easiest place to install them. So that adds both exterior flashing and returns that you don't have on a traditional flange window. But it also adds support, especially if you have a double stud wall. Where's the support, and how does that stand in the center of the insulation? So this is one of the techniques and things that I learned a lot more about in the passive house training that I took, and they're really interested in how the performance of the window is in the wall structure itself, not just the performance of the overall window, the glass and the frame. So we talked about how you might put a window in, and then how do you flash that? Where's the sill? Where's the exterior trim? Where's the interior trim? We've done exterior flange mounted windows with our double stud walls, where we have deep interior window sills, which lots of homeowners are really interested in. And we've also talked about where the wall and window installation is when you have 2 inches of exterior insulation, continuous insulation. And so there are so many different techniques and things to think about when you're doing that, and proper flashing, and how to keep water out of the window and the wall cavity itself. I was doing a big project, housing project down in Charleston, and we found when we took the windows out, we were doing a window replacement, that we actually had to replace a lot of the studs and framing below the windows because they had been leaking over time, not actually from the rain or anything like that. But when you have somebody that puts in a cooling climate a window air conditioner in the window, if it's not pitched properly, it can also drain all of that condensation from the air conditioner into the window cavity itself. And so that has a major impact. So thinking about windows and placement and air conditioners and climate zones and flashing and installation details can be really important. So I'm hoping in the coming weeks we'll be able to have some different technical window people on to the podcast and be able to talk to you specifically about their windows and how their windows are installed and why their windows are better or not better than others. Well, everybody thinks their product is the best, but I'd really like to have some more technical information on that. But today we're just talking about the basics of windows. And then shading devices and glare and solar gain, we talked about that. And how do the exterior shading devices work? Do we have deciduous trees? Do we have pine trees? Do we have shading year-round? Do we have some kind of overhang or awning? Do we have something that's removable? Do we have interior window shades? So things to think about when you're placing your windows is that you can't just have a great view. You also have to think about how hot is it in the space. So as I mentioned, this is south, which makes that window west. And so this room gets incredibly hot in the summertime. And so this is an existing house. And so the insulation and performance of this room isn't maybe what a high performance house would have indicated or wanted it to be, and so they just have the same size window in every location, which was great from an architectural appearance, but isn't that great from a glare perspective using this room as an office or overheating in the summertime. So fantastic in the wintertime when that west and south light came in, but not so great in the summertime. And so how this house gets renovated in a deep energy retrofit over the next couple of years to kind of rectify some of those issues will be something that hopefully you'll stay tuned for. So then we have how a window is actually rated for performance. So you always think when you buy a new car, you go out and you look at the miles per gallon on a car. Well, windows and house insulation and stuff is rated in U values and R values. And so windows are actually U value, which is the inverse of R value. So we measure insulation in R value. So here in Maine, the R value of your wall needs to be a minimum R21. The window needs to be a U value of 0.3. So if you want to translate that into an R value for windows, a U value of 0.3 is the same as about R3. So when you're talking about performance of the structure, when you have R21 in the walls and you have a R3 in the window, you want to try to minimize the amount of the poorest performing parts of your house. But we can't eliminate all windows for all of the reasons that we talked about earlier in the podcast. But windows also have a solar heat gain coefficient, and so that both lets in how much solar radiation actual window lets in. And then you've heard low E when you're talking about keeping the heat out, and low E is emissivity, or the ability of the material to emit long wave radiation, which is not the same as visible transmittance, which is the amount of light that it lets into the space. You've talked about gas filled and argon filled. So when they started filling windows with argon, they started to improve the performance of the windows. And so earlier when I was saying that the current code is 0.3, that's just a code window. We're doing 0.11 windows, triple pane windows in one of our high performance houses. And our R values are, we're pushing for R30, R40 where we can get it, R30 everywhere else in our wall values. So when you're talking about the difference between a R3 in your window and an R40 in your wall, it has a major impact anywhere that you have windows. And when you're trying to avoid, and you have a high solar heat gain coefficient, and you're trying to avoid solar radiation and trying to keep some of that heat out, and it makes an impact as well, not just on the heating perspective, but on how much glass you have and how much overheating that you might have in a space. So the size of the window, the location of the window, the access to daylight. So if you have a site that's really close and it's in the woods, you may not actually have access to great daylight inside the space, and so you have to take that into account. What's the room geometry in your space, and how reflective are the surfaces within that space? We also use older windows, which you can't use in the exterior of a building anymore because they're single pane, as interior to let light between two spaces. So we only want to cut down on the number of windows that we have on the north side, but we could use a high placed window in a wall between one room and another room to allow light from one room into another space. So that's a great way if you have a dark hallway, or you have a small half bath and you want to let light into that space, but you don't want to add any more windows into the exterior shell of your building because you're trying to hit some kind of performance target. So there are different color renderings when you're talking about low E, or you're talking about the different gas-filled places that you might have in a window. So if you have a high solar heat gain coefficient that you want to have on your south window so that you can absorb as much solar heat gain as possible, but you want to try to avoid as much as you can on the west facing windows, and you have a low E coating, that window is going to look like it's a different color if it's in the same room as the other window. So with the open concept being the favorable floor plan these days, we just want to point out to people that different types of windows have different color renderings depending on what you might be using it for. So it goes back to size and placement and what you want that window to perform on each side of your house. But I wanted to talk, and I feel like I'm rushing here, so I apologize if I'm just kind of hurrying through and you're seeing me looking down at my note cards, because it's been almost 30 minutes since I've been talking about windows here, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about heat loss. So windows never pay for themselves. They're the most expensive part of a building envelope. They are beautiful. They obviously change the architectural appearance of the house. They let in light, they let in sun, they let out the view so that you can see other things, but they're the poorest performing section of your house. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a 3x5 window so everybody can kind of understand the size of a 3x5. It's 15 square feet. We evaluate heat loss, and this is just a quick heat loss calculation, and it doesn't take into account shading. It doesn't take into account all the other factors that we pile into our energy model and data that it's able to evaluate. It's just a straight up heat loss calculation. Heating degree days are the number of degrees between 65 and the temperature outside during that day. So here in Portland, which is what we use as the base for the southern part of the state, there are 7,318 heating degree days in an average year. Now that changes and fluctuates each year, so that gets averaged out in the software. But as a general rule of thumb, it's in about the 7,000 range. 7,000 degrees between 65 and whatever temperature it was for the whole heating season. The calculation for that is the U value of the window times the area times the heating degree days times 24 hours. And that will tell you approximately how many BTUs per year your window is using. So in the standard code built window, which we told you earlier was 0.3, you're going to use about 790,000 BTUs per year for that window. Since we do a lot of all electric houses, I went with 15 cents per kilowatt hour and calculated that that is approximately $34 a year for each 3x5 window that you have in your house. Now, to go to a triple pane window that has a 0.11 U value or 0.12 U value, for the same 15 square foot of window, you're going to use about 316,000 BTUs and about $14 per year. So the cost difference between them is saving about $20 per year per window, but $20 per year per window on a $750 window is going to take you more than 30 years to pay off. I believe it's the 38 years to pay off the difference between those two windows, and the lifespan of the window is about 20 years. So in strict, just straight up energy performance, moving from a double pane to a triple pane window is never going to pay for itself, and the window itself is never going to pay for itself through the savings that you might get, because the difference between your window performance at 3 and your wall performance at 21 is a major difference. So again, with windows, we just try to put them in the right location to optimize the view and minimize the performance aspects of that calculation. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that and the differences there. But I also wanted to mention that some of the reasons why you might go with a triple pane window over a double pane window doesn't have to do with performance of the window itself, but has more to do with thermal comfort. As humans, we're only comfortable in about a 5 to 8 degree temperature swing difference. And so in a triple pane window versus a double pane window, that third pane of glass is going to be about 5 to 8 degrees warmer. And so when you're sitting next to a window and you feel like it's drafty, there's a potential that the window itself is drafty. It's not sealed well. It was installed with fiberglass tucked around the side of it. But it's also a potential that as a window, it's cold, and so you're giving heat to the window. And so the window itself is going to feel like it's drafty because it's cold as you sit next to it. Whereas a triple pane window, when it's that much warmer on the interior surface of glass, the thermal comfort level is a big implement. It doesn't have, as you can see, it was $20 a year, maybe difference in energy performance, but it has a major impact on you sitting next to the window when it's warm. And I just mentioned that, sorry for that quick pause there, if it seemed all of a sudden outburst there, but the water guy came to read the water meter right next to the window outside of my house, and I didn't see him, and he startled me. So anyway, I was talking about how it might feel drafty because you have fiberglass stuffed in around your windows. And so on my last soapbox point about windows, and this is really specifically about renovation windows, but it's important in how windows are installed. We talked about high performance windows being, whether you install them in the center of your insulation layer, all of those windows are going to be taped and sealed and caulked and as high performing as possible. But when we're talking about windows, the window companies have a real hold on the market where they want to have people replace their windows because people love windows and they love how beautiful they are, and they want to get rid of their old windows. And technically windows have a 20-year lifespan. But really the major impact and why you save money when you have windows replaced is because most people aren't installing windows with fiberglass stuffed around the side. So fiberglass insulation, if you listen to the podcast on why fiberglass insulation sucks, does not stop airflow. So when all of the fiberglass was just stuffed in around windows, thinking that they were insulating the shims and everything on how they installed the window, they weren't taking into account that there would be air leakage coming in around the windows themselves. And so now we use a lot of low expanding spray foam to seal around windows to really seal that space. And so the windows themselves are less drafty, they're less leaky, and air transported heat loss is one of the highest ways to waste energy in your house. So we talk a lot about really reducing and really air sealing and making your house airtight. And so we'll talk more about that on another day. But the best part of a window installation, and if you're saving a lot of money after replacing your old double hung windows with new double hung windows, is often the way they are installed now versus the way they were installed before. Yes, they're slightly better. Yes, the way that they put them together, the window components and operable parts themselves makes a big difference, but the way they're installed in the wall structure is probably the biggest energy savings that you're finding. So that was my 30-minute timer there, so that I don't talk to you forever, especially about windows. And there's all kinds of more things that I would talk about windows, but I'm hoping to get some installers on the podcast at some point to talk to you about different ways to install windows and then the different types of windows that you might install. But today I just wanted to talk a little bit about why and how windows impact a structure. So I hope you found it informative. Let me know if you have any questions, and until next time, have a great time.